So for this particular Strife build, I'm going to put in a MOSFET board, and I'm going to wire in to use the standard battery tray with the thought of using IMR batteries until I'm ready to go up to LiPo. I'm going to go ahead and trim these off. They came out just a little bit different. So I think probably the easiest thing to do is solder these connections up first and then install it into the Strife. So we're going to strip off about a 1/4 inch or so. And so we did have these, so the forward wires are positive, so back wires are negative. Can't tell you how many times I've wired these things up backwards. And so as soon as you introduce a dart, it immediately stalls if they're going the wrong way, or if one's going one way and the other's going the other way. It'll just jam either way, so not a good time. Okay, so yeah, I've got some helping hands, but I just like to whip it out and grow hair. So let's see if we can. So again, this is, we want to get heat into both our joints, into the pad and the wire to get a successful solder joint. And then since it's a liquid molten metal, it's got a capillary action, so you should see a wick in and form a good joint. And I don't think my camera's going to focus well for me, but again, we're not going to be meeting NASA standards here, but we're going to do our best. Definitely don't want any trailing wires floating around there, because if one of those crosses over and touches the positive, then we have a short circuit, which is going to be spectacular. Fortunately, so if you watch the board build video, we've got fuses in there, so it's not going to be horrifically spectacular, but it's still not going to be a good day. And a lot of these times I'll get it kind of set in there, and we'll come back, we'll reload our brush, and just trying to make it. So you see how I'm coming up. So this is going to be the top side of the board facing outward. We got our connector, so I'm just trying to make sure I don't have any extra bare wire back here. And then these upper ones we can trim off with our flush cut. So that's the motor, and then basically the same treatment on the battery side here. Yeah, I sure like this silicone wire. It's nice and soft and it bends easy. I've used some 18 gauge speaker wire in the past, and it'll handle the current, but it's sure hard to get it. Let's bring in some helping hands here. Try to make this look like we know what we're doing. So I typically like to get a hold of the wire and then let the weight of the board kind of settle on and hold it, and we're trying to get our angle so it's coming through pretty much at a right angle. And I did scale these for 16 gauge wire, so with the 18 gauge there's quite a bit of leeway. And that also helps if you go to rework it. You know, if you got to pull your motors out or whatnot, it makes it a little easier to clear the holes and get your wires back in there, because we know you're going to be tweaking on this thing a bit. works. Yeah, that's the mounting hole. Let's not go through that. I don't know what that is, like an 8 gauge. Okay, so yeah, but I just went through and did a bunch of battery testing, and kind of came to the conclusion that a pair of IMRs are your best bang for the buck, just to get you up and almost to 100 feet per second without having to cut the shell at all. And then if you add in your MOSFET here, that gets you another 5 to 10%, while still letting you keep some fuses in here so you're not blowing things up. Okay, so wires, battery. So this, for now, we're going to wire this straight into the terminals of our battery tray so that we can use those IMRs. And then later, when we're ready to upgrade, we can go ahead and put our XT60 on here and then cut our shell so that our LiPo fits. But for now, and I'd recommend doing this even if you're just, you intend to go to a LiPo. You're just a whole lot safer if you can do your testing on your AA's. Make sure you get your wiring set up and you're not got any shorts, because I'll tell you what, those LiPos are a high energy delivery system, and so any kind of short on those is bad news. So I think it's kind of safer if you just get your system built, kind of characterize it, make sure it's working the way you expect it to on a lower energy source, so any kind of short circuit conditions are not catastrophic. So these are more like the motor connections, where we're going to pre-tin them, and those connections are going to have, let's just go ahead and bring it in here and get her done. So this one we had kind of all set up for our, kind of stripped her down, got her ready, put our screws back in so we didn't lose anything critical. So now what we really need is some access to see if I can flip this around so you can get a better view on it. And again, I didn't mark these, and I probably should have, because now that I've flipped it upside down, I'm going to be all confused. But the top was the negative. That was the one that had our thermo or PTC resistor little board buckled in right there, so that's a good clue. And yeah, I'll tell you what, I just don't know. I'm trying to do this best view for you. So let's go ahead and knock this positive out of the way. So one of the things to be concerned about is the fact that we're putting a lot of heat, and this is plastic here, so we want to be expeditious and not get too much heat into our plastic and get that to melt. So preloading my solder. There's already lots of solder on the tab there. So coming in and just trying to get that hot enough to melt the solder on the tab, melt the solder on the wire. Give it a second to set. Seem to have a little stringer on there. And instead of a piece of wire sticking up before we cut it. And then I kind of fed it so we know it's going to come up through this channel here. So I'm kind of, and I know the trigger mechanism's over it. So we're trying to come in at an angle here and give ourselves a little bit of clearance. And I think we're just going to need to do the same thing here. Figure out which camera's actually catching this action here. And always pretend. The thing it does is get you a little extra flux on there. Oh boy, that flowed really nice right there. So we're good. And give it a second to cool down. All right, well, let's see. Before we go too far, we're going to need to hook in our switch for our MOSFET. Let's figure out a good angle for that. So the whole, the one big advantage of the MOSFET, besides the fact that it's so much cheaper than the micro switches, is it allows you to use the stock switches. You don't have to cut the shells, anything like that. So I'm really a big fan of that. And I'm actually using some 28 gauge wire. We're using a Molex Pico Blade connector just to make our life a little bit easier. So when I came in and cleared these out, we just cut them like nobody's business. So I'll clean that up a little bit. And again, this is that same kind of deal where there's already plenty of solder on the tabs. So if we can go ahead and just clean these up. And so these were pre-crimped wires. They're either 10 inches or 12 inches, I can't remember. And orange is probably not a good color to see on the camera when we start putting into the orange strife. I'm starting to think we should have done a blue strife, but it's too late now, but you get the idea. So 12 inches is going to be just right to get us where we need to go. And we're going to use the same strategy here. The other thing we can do, I don't do this too often, but maybe I'll just do it so we can see it here. I got some heat shrink. If you know people are going to be looking in here and looking at your blaster and you want it to be really cool, you can add some heat shrink. So we'll do that just to show it. I typically don't. The one time to really think about it is if you're running your power through the jam door, like I do for the ArduStryfe, because those two are pretty close together. Whoa, and that is a big old blob of solder, and that takes a minute to cool down. It's probably a bigger blob than we needed, but we're gonna go for it. And spring dinghy going everywhere. Okay, load my tip. Things don't worry about here. That just floats. So yeah, so having the wires pre-tinned, regardless of what type of solder is on your switch, they flow pretty good. It's lead free, but that's not really an issue. And so now that we have those on, you can slide your heat shrink down here. It shows you how big that one glob was. We still have some wire remaining. And then if you have your lighter, or this is my $15 SparkFun heaterizer, which has the best user's manual ever written. If you want to go check that out. Okay, it usually takes just a minute to get up the temperature, and I'm not going to subject you to all that, but Okay, home stretch here. So I generally like to start with putting the board in place. There's a channel up here that your battery wires are going to go into. The board itself is going to go into the spot where the wireway cover was. And you'll see our wires are going to drop right into that cover there. I'm going to use the this is not easy to do without a good view. There she goes. That. Like that. Okay, so that's going to hold that nice and tight, secure. So we've got some extra wire for our motor here, which I like having because we're going to take this out and replace these eventually. So that's going to like to fold it down. Hard to see on the camera here, but underneath. Call that a service loop. Gives you enough room to work with. And so our wires are coming in right through the original hole. I clipped off the little plastic tab there that was kind of holding the original wires in place, but for now I'm just going to put two screws in to hold that. Okay, so we wired up our switch. That's going to drop into here. Like so. Something's not quite right there. There it is. Okay, so we've got our the trigger interlock, rev switch, cover goes in place. This would be a good time if you're on your, if you know this is going to be the final time, you can put a little bit of lube in there. Okay, so let's put our trigger. I don't actually know what to call this. Pusher, trigger pusher assembly. Trigger's here, so this would be the pusher assembly. And it drops in between those two pegs. Flanged screw. One thing I just learned from watching Captain Xavier was that when you seat that screw, if you go back a little bit so it finds its natural groove and then drive it in, you're going to have a much better chance of getting it in the right way. So, spring. These wires here, so we had these a little bit longer so that we could do a lipo later. Tuck those out of the way so we're not interfering with that. And then all that leaves us with is our rev switch trigger. So that's going to go in there. We're going to feed that right in the same channel over the battery wire. Oh, wait a minute, I got ahead of myself here. So we're going to want to, so there's an existing channel from the previous wiring that comes up underneath the trigger. And we're I guess I should have done this before we... So I'll come under the trigger, the pusher. Alright, and now we're ready to insert in the ref switch. So I did on the MOSFET board, I talked this about in the video, there are some actual solder joints there if you want to solder instead of use a fancy connector. So jam door switch, so we're actually keeping this in place because it's going to hold that wire in place, and then it's also going to hold the jam door. So even though it's not electrically doing anything, we're going to keep them around. So these can go in there, and you can either use like a dab of hot glue or your soldering iron to melt those posts over if you really want to hold those in place. I generally don't worry about that too much. And then you can see that length of wire, little channel right there. And again, we got our little service loop. And I do believe that is good. And I've already got batteries in here from before. I filmed this once before, but the one camera shut off. So we are at the point where we can test this. So I've got AA's in there, and I talked about how, you know, we eventually going to go to LiPo, but we're going to test the system out in AA's. And since we've removed our jam door interlock and our clip interlock, we should just be able to hit the ref switch and nothing happens. So I can tell by the way this door is cocked here that I didn't probably quite get this guy in place. Yeah, so he's sticking out above the... It's always something. Yeah, there you heard him fire up. Attention to detail will get you every time on these guys. So the other thing I noticed was that I'd left these guys kind of cocked out. So if we were putting an ArduStryfe board in here, we would actually be wiring into this guy, but we're not going to for now. So there we are. So wires are clear up here. Wires going to the channel. Alright, so probably the most important test you can do on these is to make sure your motors are going in the right direction. I told you about how I frequently wear these backwards, and so if one's going the wrong way and you go to feed a dart, it's just going to jam. We don't want to test our fuses out just yet, so I put a little mark on there. I can see that one's turning clockwise. That one's turning counterclockwise, and of course the best test is to feed in the dart. Pow! And that's that. We got that right. All right, now we're ready to close her up.